Here it is. Good morning from Michigan. This morning's Dharma talk is along the lines of the topics that I gave the four monks that gave novice monks that gave talks at the monastery. Perhaps some of you may have heard those talks. They were around a half an hour apiece. And I asked them to talk about their teacher, which is, of course, this guy, one of them, perhaps, maybe the only one. Talk about the teaching and how that's helped them, and talk about the community, or how that has helped them. And I refer to it as my teaching, the teacher, and my community. Of course, I don't own anything, so not really. It's a referential thing rather than I own someone. In case you were puzzled by that. So people, each one of the monks, as if you heard those, handled those in quite a bit different ways, depending on their experience with Buddha's Dharma, with the teacher, and with the community. I think they did okay. I think they may have been able to step into that a little bit more deeply in a more personal way. So I'm going to go through the same thing, maybe take a little bit longer, and then I'll also open it up as I ask them to do for what we call mountains and rivers, or questions and answers. It's just a way of saying Q&A. My situation with my teacher, I started reading about Buddhism in 1960 when I was in the Marine Corps. I read Zen Flesh, Zen Bones by Paul Reps. Did not understand it then, still don't understand it. And I continued to read until I, on Buddhism and lots of other topics, related topics, you could say, until I met Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, became a student of his. And the way in which he was valuable to help me was that he was able to look at me and meet me where I was at and not correct me, but just tell me that I could do it. There was no criticism, even though I'm sure, I don't have a recording of it, I'm sure I let him, because I felt like he was the first person, and I'd met a few people, including a psychiatrist trying to understand my issues and problems. The first person I met that after reading Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, I felt like if anybody can help me, this guy's going to be able to help me. So I kind of let him have it. He listened respectfully, did not correct me, said, keep sitting. And I expressed my dismay, my difficulty, and he did not indulge me in any way other than to say, you can do it. And said it with quite a bit of force. And I'm not saying that would be helpful for others, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. Having had a very difficult stepfather, my actual biological father was killed when I was 4 in the Second World War. He was shot off the back of the tank in Germany. 26 years old. So I didn't have the benefit of his help, assuming he could have helped me. And my stepfather was not any help at all that I could see anyway. And then, of course, the Marine Corps was a different way of handling people's emotions or feelings or struggles, as I'm sure I don't have to go into that. So this is the first man that I met that was not full of himself. So that way, that actually inspired me. And to do what? To find out what this is, to find out who I am and what this world is about. That was my inquiry at the time. Up until that time, I've been trying to establish an identity by being an artist. I wanted to be a great artist, a famous artist. And it was difficult for me to face that was probably not going to happen. That hasn't stopped me from producing art somewhat. So the value there of that teacher was that, and I only had 4 private interviews with him, so not much. The value of that teacher is that he met me where I was at, and he was genuine, and wanted nothing from me, asked me for nothing. He could have. At the time, because of the way I felt, I would have given him anything, but he didn't ask. And as far as the teaching, to go to the next one, the Dharma, that as I said, started running into that in 1960 and kept reading everything I could. Alan Watts and W.Y. Evans Wentz and Alexandra David Neal. I don't know if you've heard of any of those people, but there weren't many. There might have been a half a dozen books on Buddhism that you could read. I'm sure there were books in Buddhism in the university, but you didn't have access to that. You only get access to that unless you're a member of their thing, rather than opening that up to everyone. So then, after having tried to find a way to practice, I actually started practicing in 1974 with Bruce, who teaches our Friday class, Bruce and Terry. I think he must have been about 8 years old then. That's an exaggeration. I'm sure he was 22. So we studied a little bit, mainly practiced together. We sat down and spent around 9 hours a day doing what's what was called Yin Tun. So that was the beginning of actually, other than studying on my own, of studying with someone else. We didn't study together. We just meditated together. But that was the beginning of the power of sangha. So that was happening a little at the same time. Teaching came first, then I met the teacher, and then I met his sangha. In other words, the people who were inspired by him to train their minds and donate a lot of time to something that is not conventionally rewarding, not conventionally rewarding. So studying the Dharma on my own, which I'd done somewhat over the years, studying lots of things, I realized that interacting with others to study the Dharma, study Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism and other books. And at that time, there were, I think, 3 Vajradhatu seminaries had taken place. So I had access to those books, was reading those over and over again, and reading Cutting Through over and over again. So there was the teaching, the teacher, and the community. And the community is very, very important. And it's not particularly emphasized in other communities that I've been involved with. They just, not that they don't talk to each other, but usually it's socializing. And then when they could talk to each other about the Dharma, they're told to be quiet. In other words, practice some kind of a silence practice, which I did myself for decades because I did what I was told, until I realized that Sangha may need to talk to one another instead of be quiet all the time and pretend that they're introverts. Introverts love that silence. They're the ones that shake their finger at you at a retreat and say, shh. Functional speech, noble silence. I killed 2 or 3 people who said that to me. I won't tell you where they're buried. No, of course, I'm being silly, but I'm just saying that it never made sense, but I kept thinking, well, it will. I'm just going to do what I was told, and I'll just keep practicing. And then eventually it never did make sense. And we were even doing it in the beginning, when we were kind of setting up the monastery. I was still going along with that. I'd say, well, it's a form. We'll just go ahead and go along with it. But it just eventually my energy, my wish to continue that walking, guided walking meditation as a group. I thought what we should do as a group is study together and get to know one another. And if you're sitting in the zendo and you're facing a wall, that's silence enough. When you get up, it's only natural to talk to others. I have noticed that over time that even oryoki, which is supposed to be dead silence, if you can talk a little bit in there, it's a hell of a lot easier to learn how to do that practice of eating together. And especially since everyone is an adult, the people seem to be fairly quiet. Not a lot of chatter going on. People are involved with where to put their chopsticks and how to hold them and how not to point them to other people and other things like that. So can't do this without a teacher. Can't do this without a teaching. And I don't think you can do this without a sangha. Even if that sangha is only one other person. So I'll conclude there with that part of it, and we'll open it up for mountains and rivers or questions. It doesn't have to be about this. It could be about mountains and rivers or questions about anything. So if it's about this material, I'm happy to respond. And if it's about something that takes us in another direction, that's certainly all right also.
Shokoban, how do you talk about personal experience in a way that's deeper, that's helpful to other people?
Don't. That's how you do it. Don't do it. Don't talk about your deeper experience with anyone. You hear me talking about my deeper experience?
Shokoban, earlier in the talk, you mentioned that you felt like we could have talked about that in a deeper way. That's what I'm referring to.
Okay. Well, think about that for a while. Did you feel personally picked on there?
Shokoban, no, I like the response of don't.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. And that's a good one. When I say in a deeper way, I don't necessarily mean personal about what's happening with you personally. I'm saying it could have spread out a little bit more. But I don't have any. I think all the talks were good. I don't have any. Everyone did a good job. I thought very good, and so I don't have any criticism or constructive criticism that's helpful. I think repetition is what is important to learn there. Go ahead, Bushin.
Bushin bowing. Is being introverted an obstacle on the path?
No, and being introvert is just a way of talking about the way personality manifests in some situations. I don't think you can lock anybody down into that area, but people tend to, if you set up something where everybody has to be quiet for a certain length of time, kind of artificially, excuse me, not that sitting down facing a wall and doing nothing isn't somewhat artificial, but it's not near as artificial as being around other people who are doing things and moving around and doing dishes or whatever, and not talking to them. That's way too artificial as far as I'm concerned. And what it does is it creates the feeling or the belief that you're training your mind. And actually you're not. You're just reinforcing ignorance. You're actually getting in the way of dependent origination with some artificiality that makes you, the ego mind, feel like you're more mindful. So therefore, the people who are extroverts are onto that. They don't like it. They want to talk, and they will talk. And then the people who are introverts will correct them because they think, I've been there. I've been with countless groups of people for, intensive training seminar where you get there and you don't get to meet anybody. Here's a person from Europe at one in Chicago or something. It traveled just for that. And you don't even get to know them. That is the opposite of Sangha to me. But this is how it was set up. And it was set up by Trungpa Rinpoche. He just came out of a monastery situation and escaped from Tibet, taken over by the Chinese. So I'm sure running into the Western culture was probably pretty much like walking into a what do they call those things? Insane asylum. That's right. So he's not. He just did the best he could. I wouldn't say that. And then the Zen tradition, he had that as a something that had been in the West for a while. And of course, the Zen, with their kind of macho kind of culture for their men, is more comes out of the Bushido code of, lots of really strong discipline for these masculine warriors and samurai people. I'm not against that. I love samurai movies. It's great. They're great. They're entertaining. But we don't have to do that. We can train our minds as they are in our society with our culture. This is why we don't have nuns. We have monks. If you're male, female, want to be ordained, been fully ordained, then you're going to be a monk, not a nun.
Yeah. So if we tend toward being introverted,
yes.
Does it make it more difficult for us to see things as they are?
Not at all. Not at all. And I would say just relax. When I use that, it's descriptive. It's not a judging thing. People sometimes think I'm an extrovert, so because I talk so much. But I would say, in that situation, interestingly, when the silence, the noble silence actually is noble, that's when you just don't talk. But you don't have a big name on there, silence only on your thing, some kind of formation. It's just ridiculous to do that to people, especially adults. I mean, if they're 8 years old, maybe you could do something with the sound. But yeah, you can. I'm sure you've noticed, Bushin, if you've been at the all day or retreats, or if you've been at the monastery when there's been longer retreats that. If you're not meditating and you can talk or not. If you're quiet, people will respect that. If you don't want to talk, they're not going to make you talk. I'm talking about monastery residents, people who are practicing a lot are not going to try to draw you into some kind of chatter. You get to, it's more natural. Is that what you were looking for?
Yeah, I know that for myself, sometimes I don't know, I guess I fall somewhere in the middle, but I know that I tend toward not talking a lot of times. We're not saying anything or not asking something because it feels forced for me to do that. So I only really say something when I have something to say. So I'm just looking for, I guess, if I were asking just for me, like, should I be saying more? Maybe is another question going.
No.
Thank you.
Yes.
So question about your teacher. When or how did you realize that you had received a transmission from Chogyam Trungpa?
Well, when I met him, I didn't even know about that there was some kind of, I suspected it by reading Zen texts and so on, but there was only a few books on Tibetan Buddhism even available back in the 60s. In the early 70s. So the whole idea of transmission, I didn't realize that I actually got pointing out instructions from him directly. But I didn't know it for years because I kept trying to understand what this was, what was happening, who I was, and how to deal with my own disturbances and craziness and difficult thought patterns and so on. So it took a while, but it took a lot of sitting meditation. And I also think that I got a lot of help from, not directly from the sangha, being a bunch of little teachers all teaching me things, but interacting with people that were trying to train their minds, that sometimes were more difficult than someone else, but you're in a community where you work with them anyway. And you find out that the difficulty quite often is what you think about what's happening rather than what's actually happening. Very often we tend to, if you're around somebody that is training their mind, probably can be very helpful over time. and in a way of showing you how you tend to, instead of meet people where they're at as they actually are, we meet them where we think they're at. It's so kind of interacting with people that were on a different frequency from them. It triggers the insecurity in our own mind, which is, of course, the ego, feeling like it needs to know something that it can't quite figure out or understand. I'm not sure if that covered if you had more to that, or Chisho.
Yeah, so it triggers a follow-up question. The way you're describing dealing with the other sangha members seems to suggest talking about each other's practice.
No.
Which you just said you should. Okay, that's what I wanted to ask. What it meant then.
You do that. I think you can do that in the context of book study. Some of that you might be studying at, and you might be studying the 30 verses, or you might be studying so the way Trungpa Rinpoche talks about working with negativity, or you may, any one of the things that we work with as a teaching, and it's all over the place. It's all over the Buddhist teaching. We study everything that comes up, just about, generally speaking, and specifically. But no, it's not necessarily about sharing your what's happening in your mind stream. Although by bring that back a little bit, although there are times when that's the only response that will come out. That's the only one, but it needs to come out dependently. It needs to have actual permission from the environment to doing that, rather than you're going to talk about your enlightenment experiences or your confusion experiences, which is very similar. I should say, which are very similar. So as you heard me say, and it's kind of a silly thing that I say, but people tend to repeat it. So it certainly means a lot to me, and it probably means a lot to others. Don't do anything unless you have to. If you're doing something you don't have to do, you're just it's just a kind of a random casino. You're just gambling on stuff. Don't do it. Keep it close, but don't cling to it, and allow your life to show up in your awareness, not just in your thought process. The thought process, as soon as you start to think or analyze or anything, starts to go like this. It might be very clear relatively in itself. Its own structure of thought is very clear, but you're blocking out all the other senses. The true understanding is to receive. Just receive. That's what all these nerve endings are for. They're not to fill up with, clog up with thought patterns about what you're receiving.
Junshu bowing. There's a question on YouTube from Hakaran.
Hakaran, yes.
She asks, what is happening when I feel indifferent to things I used to feel passionate about?
You're growing up. I could be specific about it. There are some things that might be have some other kind of a structure to it that would be more personal to you, but less passion about things probably is helpful. That doesn't mean that you won't be very passionate about some things, but a lot of the things tend to have a rotation that's happening in a different way. It doesn't really get fulfilled so much as it's seen without judgment. Again, I'll say this again, without judgment or evaluation, it doesn't work anymore. It doesn't make any sense if you were to talk about it that way. It just isn't necessary. You might have been that passion area might have been just to help you to feel more alive. The ego wants to feel very alive. Oh, I feel so alive when I'm doing this or that. This is just baloney. And I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, not yours or anyone's, but look closely at those emotions. Look very closely, because anytime you're emotional about anything, the sense fields, the whole sensorium, nothing is separate. So therefore, any energy that's going this direction, that energy comes away from everything else that's happening. And on this path, your energy, if you're serious about this path, what's going to happen. Maybe not this week, maybe not this year, but this is about others. This is about dedicating yourself to others. Put others before yourself. And you could say, are there others? And I would say, ultimately, no. But that's the only way we can that's the only way we can work with the self-centeredness, is to take some of that energy that goes into me, and my stuff, what I want, what I don't want, what I don't want to happen, what I want to happen, and how I'm doing, how I'm feeling, and put that towards others, help others. That doesn't mean you have to lift a finger. It's the intention, and not the look how much I'm helping everything. How you appear, how it is, and how it appears. It appears can appear anyway because it's dependently arisen, but how it is can't be. It's choiceless. How it is. It is not separate. And if you feel or believe otherwise, then I'm not going to interfere with that. That's up to you to do that. But you might have a few years left to live with that.
When you're bowing, Michael Reed from Kalamazoo asks, how and where did you meet Chogyam Trungpa?
I met him I met him in Chicago. I don't know the exact date, but it was either very late 1973 or early 74. It was in the winter, so I think it was around the holidays. So it's probably December, but I don't know for sure. Maybe January. In Chicago, I had an interview with him. So, Elna, you had a question?
Elna Bowing. You talk about the Buddha, the Dharma, and the sangha.
I do.
The category of teacher, is the teacher like a stand-in for the Buddha, or is the teacher explaining the Dharma?
So the teacher is, first of all, a sangha, another person who's part of the community. And then the teacher, depends on who's doing it and how you work with it. Then the person can function as a representative or as an aspect of the Buddha. But actually, you, from the ultimate point of view, you're the Buddha. But you may need help seeing that, because sometimes the idea about that seems to, well, I'm not that great. I'm not as great as the Buddha. The Buddha was nobody. He was a profound nobody. It was profound. He saw that. Therefore, he was able to expand and radiate his wisdom and compassion. So with each person, it doesn't mean that in our culture, another culture is kind of enforced on you. In Tibet, you have to bow and you have to prostrate. In the Zen tradition, you have to do prostrations to the Roshi and all of that. So it's kind of enforced in cultures that have been supporting that for centuries. But in ours, it looks a little phony. When I say phony, I mean it's just like kind of pretentious to do too much so-called worship of the teacher or the. On the other hand, if I have a student that needs that kind of to do that, I don't stop them. If they want to work with me as somebody they're looking up to, or across to as what's called a Kalyana Mitra, it's called a companion in the virtue. But the Kalyana Mitra could be a sangha member, or it could be the teacher. I think it's a very relative thing. The teaching person, if he or she or they understand who they are, then then they'll be able to understand where the student is and relate to them in such a way that fundamentally helps it. That's what was so powerful about my teacher, Trungpa Rinpoche, and about Kobun Chino Roshi. I was in two different places, and they both met me exactly where I was. It could not have been more perfect. It just couldn't. It's exactly what I needed to in order to keep going in a way that was fundamentally helpful, rather than just more circles. And more questions about that, Ellen, if you have it.
Coming from being Christian,
Can't hear?
Can you hear me?
I can. No.
To build a relationship to the Buddha, what do you recommend?
Don't do anything. Meditate. Train your mind. The teaching person will relate to you where you're at if they know who they are, if they're clear about their own, if they're nothing is no longer puzzling with them, it's not going to be puzzling about you either. So therefore, but it's mutual. You have to come towards the teaching person, and then you let them know how much you want to be taught, especially in our culture. That we don't have the cultural construct of you get to go in a monastery just because your mom and dad sent you to study under the Buddha or study with the Roshi or study with the Tibetan Lama. The cultural context would support it there. We don't have that. So therefore, the teaching person is just a person who's teaching. That's why quite often teachers in the West will back out of having any kind of credential because they want to just interact with people more naturally. So sometimes too much of a credential, people think they're joining some kind of a cult or something, and it's far from a cult. Our situation is far from a cult. No one's required to do anything, including, and there's no membership. I don't do any of that. Not that that's wrong. I think it's kind of membership is about controlling, and I'm not interested in controlling. Unless it's controlling lightning. If I could do that, that'd be really a kick. Further question there? I feel like there's another one, especially coming out of Christian tradition. There's all that authority stuff up there. And it's not that the authority situation shouldn't be worked with, but the way it needs to be worked with, and this is difficult for for people who are theists or been trained or raised or enculturated in a way to think there's a higher power. And that's a misunderstanding. And I'm not correcting all of the 12-step people who have been helped by AA and so on. Of course not. That's a powerful thing. Some people, that's the only way they can stay alive is to do that. But I'm saying that if you're doing an awareness practice, look at the nature of authority. Look at the nature of authority. It's just a really interesting area. Is there anyone in charge of anything? I mean, the whole structure, it can be looked at. And I encourage each of you to, as Kobun said to his students, get your own authority. He didn't say do it. If you had met him, you could see following him around is like following a feather. He was practically not even physical. His presence was bodhicitta. It was just his presence was powerful, but not in the sense of being rock-like or solid. Trungpa Rinpoche was more like a big rock, whereas Kobun was more like feathers. So and he said, get your own authority. So what do? You look, how do you get your own authority? Well, first you see that the self-centeredness, the ego is unreal and gets its feeling of strength and power from belief, disbelief, and ignoring. Those aren't wrong. That's just people tend to do those, but less is better in that area if you can do it. Anything else, Alna?
Yeah, how do you refrain from projecting onto the teacher that they're the new authority?
Just watch the projection. You don't have to get rid. If you try to get rid of projections, they go underground. The next thing you know, they're slipping up through the floorboards and going between your toes. So don't get rid of anything. Just keep it in sight. Otherwise, if you don't have to get rid of the projection. The very nature of projection is it's unreal. So as long as you see that you're projecting onto the teacher as a new authority, if the teacher is a true teacher, I mean, they're teaching out of their realization and not out of some information or some kind of a cultural baggage from another century or another culture. They're really teaching as this is, as it is, not separate. Then very unlikely that they're going to pull rank on you, so to speak. In other words, say, you should do that because I said so. That might have been necessary in ancient cultures. And some people teaching out of ancient cultures into this present time may think they still need to do that. I disagree. I don't think that's necessary. I think it's necessary to be genuine, to be kind and appreciate others and appreciate people's confusion. Because if you can't appreciate people's confusion, you can't help them, because you actually think they're wrong, they think they're wrong, and you think they're wrong. So you have to appreciate the confusion. Confusion is awakening. It is awakening. It's not separate. It's not two. There is no polarity. All the polarities we see of up, down, back and forth, right and wrong, good and evil, existence, non-existence, theism, non-theism. That's another one that's quite interesting, because if people get into non-theism, then they want to be atheists and they want to accuse Zen Buddhists of being atheists. And that's just a generalization. It's not helpful. So there's nothing to believe. There's no one to follow. But you could watch your beliefs, your spontaneous grasping on things, or your spontaneous rejection of things. Don't interfere with your own confusion, because if you do, you strengthen the identity, which is already false, that's trying to get rid of that. It's just, it's called circles. You go in circles. And what I say to everybody, and I'll say to you, because it was said to me, you can do this. You can do what? You can see the truth yourself. You can actually see it. Do I see the truth? That's not the point. Then we'd have to get in, what is truth? What am I seeing? And is there someone seeing anything? And this is why the teaching in Buddhism of emptiness is so powerful. Emptiness is not the final teaching, like some teachers think that that's the final frontier or something. But it's not.
Ian Bowing.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit of what pointing out instructions are?
Yeah, I can say it's going to show up differently with different student-teacher relationships. And it can be, you're just saying, I do it all the time. I say, nothing is separate. There isn't anything else. That's pointing out instruction. So I do it constantly. I mean, I'm saying it all the time. There isn't anything else. Don't believe a word I say. That's pointing out instruction. You do it. You see it. You see it. How do you do that? You train your mind to sit down and hold still and watch the movement. And the movement is the nature of confusion. But that which sees the confusion is not particularly disturbed at all, unless it contaminates, and it gets contaminated by the confusion. This is called ego. So I say, pointing out instruction is, I say, liberate yourself. What are you liberating yourself from? I don't know. You find out.
Ian Bowing, is there a relationship between pointing out instructions and a formless meditation practice like Shikantaza?
Please paraphrase your question.
Is there a reason that you teach the...
Go for it. Go, please go. Don't hesitate. Come on.
Is there a reason that you use pointing instructions and also teach Shikantaza together?
Well, you can't. It's a mutual thing. You're not, the pointing out instructions is going to take some time, but and the sitting practice, of course, is going to take some time. But what you're doing is you're training your mind. You're kind of deconstructing the tendency for the mind to grasp onto this and reject that and ignore this. So you're sitting, you're actually watching the grasping, you're watching the rejecting, and you're watching the shutting down of passion, aggression, and ignorance without interfering. You hold the body still, and this allows you to see more clearly that the way in which you continue to make things worse for yourself, to make the very suffering that comes up on your nerve endings to actually fight with that or make it worse or try to get rid of it or stop it. and so on. And so that the shikantaza part, and then interacting with the teacher, talking to the teacher. When you ask questions, the teaching person, in this case, this person, responds to you in such a way that doesn't make things worse for you or make you feel particularly run away, and doesn't particularly solve the situation for you with some kind of right and wrong answer, but continues to put something in there that is helpful to you. It's like showing someone how to ride a bicycle. Say, no, don't know this. No, you'll be all right. You'll balance. You just need to stop going this way and that way. If you just don't fall over, then you're balanced. That's pointing out instruction. So that brings the awareness into the dynamic you're dealing with. And everyone here is dealing with a different kind of imbalance. And it's about seeing the imbalance, not meddling with it. Don't meddle. Takes a while. As I sometimes say, and I'll say now, this is more pointing out instruction. Awakening is not an experience. It has experiential aspects to it, but it's not something that shows up. It's not an experience. You will never experience awakening. If you do, come and see and tell me about it. I'd love to hear your story of how you awoke or what awakening is to you. If you awaken, you won't need to talk to anybody, especially me.
Ian Bowing, since starting to sit, I've had plenty of experiential flashes. I understand it's not necessarily awakening because I definitely don't always feel like I'm awake. How do I work with flashes like that, including things like past life flashes?
Just enjoy them, or be irritated by them. And maybe it's a past life where you were a rug salesman and somebody stole all your rugs. Probably irritating. Just notice it. Just be with it. Just let it occur. Who needs rugs? I'm saying you could actually just be with whatever occurs, because if you open that door, to what I would call the seventh consciousness, and just air that place out, let that place air out. You don't need a conclusion. You don't need to know in the general sense of, I know the sun is shining, and now I know I'm awake. Now I know I'm asleep. Now I know I'm hungry. No. All this relative knowledge just clogs everything up. Have you ever thrown a whole pile of carrots at a fan that's running on high? Okay. I was going to use that as an example, but.
I think I kind of get it though.
Good. Yeah, just watch what moves. Just watch the fan. Do nothing with it. Watch it spin. You don't have to stop the spinning. It's just an astonishing understanding before you actually awaken, to actually begin to discover that you do not have to meddle with this. If you're on the path, your path is about awareness and clarity, and the clarity is about what? About the confusion. Clarity about clarity is useless. I mean, even though when you're clear about the confusion, then that is how it shows up. It's clarity about clarity, but you have to start with the confusion, and then it's like water poured into water. There isn't anything else. The elseness is gone. I don't care how much you add to it, it's still the same thing. But it's a realization. It's not a thought pattern, not a conclusion. You can't conclude this because you'll be sorely disappointed. It will fade. And the things that rise up, Ian, for you are, they won't last. Just watch them come and go. They're like commercials. Pretty soon the commercial's over and you get back to the actual movie. So would somebody read Mayun's question? I saw she had one on the screen. And I have a full screen, so I don't know how many other people are on here.
Oh, go ahead, Mark. I was going to read the question. Go for it.
Yeah, me too. Mark Bowing, this is from Mayun. Did you feel unconditionally loved by both of your teachers? Mark Bowing.
Yeah, I didn't recognize it as love, but yeah, absolutely. Unconditionally, good word. I did.
Oh, go ahead, please, Mark.
I have a question of my own. Mark Bowing. I don't have a higher power anymore, but is there any equivalent of that in Buddhism?
Yeah, it's your Buddha nature. But we have to see that. But the ego mind is very graspy in that area. So you have to see that. You have to first clarify that part and see that everything is empty of otherness, including there's no one here. The voice, the vocabulary, the life and death situation just flows much easier when there's nobody concerned about outcomes. There is no other. Past and future is an illusion. More.
I have used the idea of a higher power as something to ask for help staying sober.
Well, yeah.
And
you could
so
just
I
ask.
still do that.
Well, you don't have to ask the higher power. You could just ask. Or you could ask the Buddha, or you could ask bodhisattvas, or you could ask anything. It's supplication. Nothing wrong with supplication. We're not saying that everything disappears and there isn't anybody else. We're saying that it's the grasping at elseness, at something else, that creates the issue. Of course, you're over there, I'm over here, and the boundary between us is completely genuine and real and needs to be respected. So it doesn't separate things any more than the separation that is already there, like the separation between two hands. You don't want to get them too separate, because then they don't have a body to function with anymore. So I would say you should, and I'm saying this now, I would say it in an interview with you two, you continue to use a higher power. Talk to your higher power, of course. Anyone who's doing that, I don't meddle with anybody's style or interaction there. I would say, insofar as you can, don't necessarily clamp down on it like this is the only way and I have to do this forever, no matter what. Don't set up standards for yourself. If the higher power is something that's helpful to you, by all means, talk to your higher power. I talk to angels, and I'm a Buddhist, but I don't go around. Go ahead. You.
I stopped asking a higher power. I do just ask.
Okay. Well, if the higher power comes back, that's fine too.
Cool. Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions?
Teresa Bowing. When you answered Mayne's question,
yes,
about unconditional, it didn't feel like love. What did it feel like, Bowing?
Well, I couldn't see it because my own thought patterns, my own hope and fear was in front of it. So I thought that Trungpa Rinpoche was, I was embarrassed. I was so embarrassed because I felt like he could see who I was, and he could see my confusion. He could see my narcissism. He could see my self-centeredness, and it was just sucked. So I didn't know. I mean, looking back on it is when I know that I received unconditional love from him, of course. And same thing with Kobun. Kobun was actually rude to me, deliberately rude. When I say deliberately, I don't think he sat around and thought about, I need to be rude to this guy. He just met me where I was at. And if you meet people where you're at, you don't know how you're going to function. I have a plan for no one, especially Unyo. I can't figure out what I wouldn't know what to plan for her. But I'm saying when I say I don't have a plan, I'm not saying I can't cooperate with someone and say, yeah, let's do this, or let's get some groceries, or I'm not saying that it destroys the whole dynamic, that you somehow are some kind of a weirdo with no past and future. I'm just saying there's no grasping at anything. So it's very, very simple relative truth that you're operating in. It is so relative that you're not clinging to your own life, even though it doesn't mean you're going to eat bad food or live in such a way that's dangerous. It isn't like you're throwing your life away, but the attachment is not there. So therefore, I felt looking back on it, I realized that I got the kind of help I needed, and that's how that love or that caring showed up. Is that he was, both of them were, met me in the situation I was in, and met me in such a way that it helped me. With Kobin, I had to give him permission. Trungpa Rinpoche, he knew he had permission. Although he had to ask me, who inspires you? Before he started telling me what to do. And I just, as I've told this story before, because I was so tongue-tied and so embarrassed, I couldn't talk. Although I wanted to say, oh, Rinpoche, I really like your book, Cutting Through, and I think you're one of the greatest teachers I've ever read about. And, I'm just like, I can't say anything because I know I already look like a fool, and I know I don't have very much self-knowledge, but I know myself well enough to know that if I open my mouth, I'm going to make a fool of myself. And he saw that I already was a fool. So he was very kind and just said, you can do it. Keep sitting. So instead, I just gestured. When he said, who inspired you? I just gestured. That's all I could do. And then he mocked me because he could see how terrified I was, and made a face like, me? Made it even more embarrassing.
There are a few more questions from YouTube.
Certainly.
Shane Thompson asks, how did you support yourself and family from 1974 to the foundation of Sokukoji? How did you balance that and practice?
I worked in a factory, painted some signs. In 1980, I went to seminary, and so 3 months out, that lost my factory job, which was paid pretty well and had insurance. So for the first 7 years, I had a pretty good situation. But then I lost that. So then because I'd learned to paint signs when I was in the Marine Corps in the graphic arts area. So I started a sign business. Started with a box, went around door to door, and spent 3 days selling signs. One day going to get the materials. Another day, a day and a half building or painting a sign, and then back on the road again on Monday selling signs. I did that for years. Eventually got where I hired some people. And I'll try to go through the whole thing quickly. Had 4 or 5 employees and sold the business, married somebody else, moved to Minneapolis area and lived up there for 10 years, and tried to do a brokering, selling signs and hiring a company to do it. But there's no insurance in that. And my wife at the time, who's now passed away, had a heart condition and needed insurance. I didn't particularly because I went to the VA, having been in the military. And then worked for 2 different sign companies up there. And I don't know what else you'd want to know. I just worked at different jobs and did the best I could to do that. Can you think of anything else that I would?
I wonder about the balance between your practice and being a householder. Yeah. I think you've said
maybe that's what he's asking.
Any vacation time or anything was always.
Yeah, I never took any more vacations. I would just go into retreat. If I had a vacation, or I would just set it up so I would practice. Did quite a few retreats, and then also daily, not daily, but a couple times a week, and at least once a month, have an all-day sitting and host that wherever I was at, either in a place that our community, which really started in 74, and then was in a storefront downtown in Battle Creek for a number of years, 5-6 years, and then moved into somebody's house, and then just went back and forth like that. And as I said earlier, I started, one of the first people I practiced with was Bruce in 1974, Bruce and Terry. And sat all day sitting with them. I'm not sure if there's some specific thing about livelihood and so on. It's just kind of what everybody's doing. You need to have a job unless you can get somebody to fund you. Like sometimes people in the monastery who want to do extensive practice do a GoFundMe or something. I think Shoto's asking for help right now so that he can just not work for a year, so that he can just practice. And just practicing here means a lot of practice. If you haven't looked into it, it means you're going to be sitting 6.5 hours a day, weekdays, a part of the Saturday. So it's a lot of practice. And the reason I set it up that way, I want that to be available to people, seems to take a lot of intense, not only sitting awareness practice in the way that it's taught here, and also it takes a lot of interacting with community and studying together, just like this situation is. And not that there aren't teachers who do this. Of course, there are lots of them, but probably not as much as we do. We get together every day, sometimes several times a day, and talk to each other, ask questions, discuss material that we're studying, whether it's the 30 verses or Dogen Zenji is a Shobogenzo. He's been studying that on Wednesdays at noon for a long time. And then people's jobs come in and say, well, I can't be there, I've got to work. And so then people come and go and do the best they can, but there's no right or wrong to it. People do as much as they can or as much as they need to, or as far as jobs. It's being a householder on this kind of a path is difficult when there's no culture that basically supports it. If you go to Japan, communities, even though they don't go and attend the temple necessarily very much, they really support them. My son Mason, who lived in Kobin's family temple there for a couple of years and worked, that's where he went through his training at. And he would go out and do like a memorial service or something like that where Kobin's brother Hojo-sama trained him to do this. So he would go in, he could speak enough Japanese to go in and have a group of families, or might have been having a 100-year anniversary of someone who passed away, who was a great-great-grandfather or something. In Japan, they do that. They do one every year, and then every 5 years, and every 10 years. And so they don't forget you when you die. And then and they also drink a lot, so that they would drink a lot of sake and eat a lot of sushi. And then he would come back to the temple with money, with an envelope, $500-600 that he would keep. That would be his. He wouldn't have to give it to the monastery, or the temple rather. So different in that situation. Whereas over here, we also get help from sangha, people who want to support this situation. We get a tremendous amount of help. We couldn't have a monastery if it weren't for the generosity of people who do have jobs and are working and slice off a little bit of their money to send. And we, so a lot of it is about that. Is there further question on that? Was it Sean? Shane? Yeah, Shane. Kind of rambled on a little bit there.
Not another question from Shane, but a question from Kyle.
Okay, Kyle.
He asks, can you speak more about what emptiness is?
Yes. A simple way of talking about emptiness. It's a teaching. It's not the final stage, but it's what would we call final, but it is an aspect of it. And the best way to talk about emptiness is things are empty of what we think they are, and that happens on deeper levels. We look at something and we have an idea of what that is. We name it, we classify it, we evaluate it, we have some judgments hooked to it, and what that fundamentally is, its fundamental nature is empty of all of our conclusions. So that's the kind of relative kind of emptiness that begins to show up. And as you go along, it's called Sanskrit is shunyata, of course, as you probably know that if you're asking the question. So it is the fundamental emptiness that we're moving towards as we practice is empty of self and empty of other. And so empty of self is a little easier to see. We eventually see that there's the skandhas, form, feeling, perception, concept, and consciousness, the way it conceptually talking about how a human being, a human life shows up, to cover all the form, feeling, perception through all the sense fields, concepts of the thinking process, and all the 6 sense fields that are all those objects are coming through into those sense fields all the time. Smell, hearing, tasting, seeing, smelling, or all of that coming together all at once creates the illusion of a separate being. But when that is investigated through awareness practice, and it can be a little difficult, but when we see that what we thought was here is empty of that, is something there, but it's not a separate being anymore. It's not separate from anything. Ultimate understanding is not separate from itself. So the ego is still there, but it's just unreal, and it's just as unreal as the stick, maybe less real than this stick. And then we look out and see that everything we see that we thought there was somebody else who was doing well, or how somebody else is doing really terribly, or somebody else who is being born, somebody else is dying. All the relative things that are happening is it is empty of your perception, your imputation, your ideas, your judgments, your evaluations, your conclusions about it, including your own hope and fear, including your own anger and delight. Empty of it. It's unreal. It has a relative reality, but the relative reality is just that. It's relative, dependently arisen. So it has no longevity other than what you give to it. So it doesn't, it just comes and goes. Where what is real, what is fundamentally real, doesn't do anything. Nothing happens. It does not come and go because it is never, and it can't disappear because it's never been born. So it's unborn, unceasing. So it's unborn. It's empty in the sense that it has not come into existence. Body minds come into existence. Who you actually are doesn't come and go. It's like a cosmic joke. Needs to be realized, and that's part of the path. The path, empty things are empty. Like Kobun's translation of the Heart Sutra's mantra. The Heart Sutra's mantra is Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhisattva, or empty. Gone, completely awake, so be it, is the conventional translation. And his was falling apart, nothing to do. And then I think there was another phrase on the end of that he said, some people quote him as saying, everything all at once, which is another way of saying, a relative way of saying, by stealing the meaning of time and saying nothing separate. It's just this. And you can realize this, or not, or do something else. There's merry-go-rounds and roller coasters and various kinds of sports. Not taking away from it. There's all kinds of things you can do to pass your time away until the body slowly goes back into the elements, or quickly goes back into the elements these days. Not a good place for humor, but it's true. It's, death comes without warning. This body will be a corpse. At that time, the Dharma, or the truth, whether it's a Buddha Dharma or not, needs to be the truth, will be your only help. So practice it now. See the truth now, and start with your own mind stream by looking at the wall. I'm just looking at the questions. Final question, if you have it. I know it's getting late, but I don't have anything to do. Kyle asks, is emptiness the same as nothingness? No, it's not. Nothingness means nothing's there. Emptiness means that what you thought was there is not there. There's something there. Find out what it is. I'll help you with your permission, or I'll leave you alone. You can do it yourself. Shall we dedicate the merit? Okay.
From the monastery. From
the monastery. Could somebody in the monastery please do that? Thank you.
of this penetrate into all places so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Jiho san shi shi fu shi son bu sa mo ho sa mo ho ja mo ro mi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna, Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokukoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.